Wind down tonight, dear traveler, and allow your mind to journey far from the concerns of your day. Imagine a world shaped by ice and fire, where the horizon was not a limit, but an invitation. A time before maps held all the answers, when courage was measured by the breadth of the open sea, and whispers of distant lands drifted on the biting winds. This is a story not just of conquest, but of quiet exploration, of the deep connection between man and the unforgiving, beautiful natural world. As you settle deeper into your rest, feel the air around you subtly shift. The familiar warmth of your room begins to gently recede, replaced by a bracing, cool breeze, hinting at vast, open spaces. The soft sounds of your world fade, giving way to the distant rhythmic creak of wood, the low murmur of waves, and the faint, hypnotic splash of water. You might even catch the tang of sea salt, pine tar, and damp earth. You find yourself standing on a vast, open expanse, beneath a sky thick with stars, so bright they seem to hang just within reach. The deck beneath your feet is solid timber, gently swaying with an unseen current. The only sound is the rhythmic groan of timbers and the endless whisper of the sea, stretching out into the inky blackness. From the shadows, where the deck meets the mast of a great ship, a figure emerges. He is tall, clad in practical wool and leather, his movements quiet, deliberate, betraying a lifetime of navigating unsteady surfaces. His eyes, though ancient with the wisdom of forgotten centuries, hold the clear, unwavering gaze of one who has seen the edge of the known world and found it merely a new beginning. He carries no weapon, only the calm presence of a seasoned voyager. He turns to you, a faint, weathered smile touching his lips. His voice, deep and resonant, carries the calm of countless nights spent under the stars, far from any familiar shore. Welcome, traveler. I was wondering when you might finally hear the call of the waves. Do not be alarmed. You are safe. You are merely joining me on a journey, one that began long ago, yet continues to echo in the quiet currents of time. The sea, you see, is never truly silent. It hums with the whispers of forgotten voyages and the dreams of those who dared to listen. My name is Leif Erikson. Some call me Leif the Lucky. Though luck, I found, was often simply a matter of careful observation, the patience to wait for the right wind, and knowing when to trim the sail. I've known the biting wind and the silent calm of the open ocean more intimately than I've known many men. And tonight I shall be your guide, not through a world of loud battles, but through the quieter moments of our lives, the hidden corners of our spirit. This is not a tale of thunderous battles, though we knew those well enough, as all men of our time did. No, this is a whisper of the sea, of the quiet bravery it took to venture beyond the known, to push past the comfortable edge of the world. It is a story of discovery, not always with a roar and a clang of steel, but often with the soft creak of a longship's timbers and the distant cry of a strange bird overhead. Feel the deck beneath your feet. It breathes, does it not? With every rise and fall of the hull, with every whisper of the wind, this is the heartbeat of a longship, the vessel that carried our dreams and our doubts across vast gray waters. Tonight we sail through memory, so breathe deep, listen to the sea's lullaby, and let your mind drift with the currents. We have much to see before dawn. Now that you have joined me on this journey across the quiet waters of memory, let us first anchor ourselves in the rhythm of our lives back home. Leif Erikson's voice, a steady murmur, invites you. Imagine a Norse settlement, nestled against a fjord, perhaps, or tucked into a valley kissed by the cold winds. The air, bracing and clean, carries the scent of wood smoke, curing fish, and the damp earth after a spring thaw. This was the foundation upon which all our voyages were built. It was a life lived close to the bone, where every day was a testament to resilience, and every quiet moment, a hard-earned peace. You find yourself standing not on a ship, but on solid ground, the sensation firm beneath your feet. The sounds of the distant waves fade, replaced by a subtle symphony of daily life. You hear the faint, rhythmic clang of a smithy's hammer, softened by distance, the low bleating of sheep, and the occasional whir of a spinning wheel. The air is cool, fresh, carrying the scent of pine and damp soil, far from the salt and tar of the open sea. A day in our village began early, Leif continues, his voice now a quiet narrative, guiding your imagination. Not with the clatter of city markets and the rush of merchants, but with the lowing of cattle stirring in their byres, the bleating of sheep in the pens, and the contented clucking of hens scratching in the straw of the longhouse. You would hear the creak of wooden doors as families began to stir, the soft murmur of sleepy voices, and then the steady, rhythmic clack, clack, clack of a hand loom as wool was spun into thread, or threads woven into cloth. If you close your eyes for a moment, you might almost feel the bracing chill of the morning air against your face, quickly warmed by the familiar, comforting, crackling fire in the central hearth. A constant heart within our homes. You might find yourself instinctively taking a deeper breath, trying to draw in the phantom sense he describes, feeling a quiet sense of calm settle over you as he paints the scene. Step inside a longhouse with me, if you will, Leif suggests, his voice taking on a more intimate tone. Don't mind the smoke, your eyes will adjust. It is a constant presence, a friend in the cold, filtering the light and lending its scent to everything. The light here is dim, certainly, filtered through narrow slits in the turf roof, or perhaps the occasional small, translucent window made of stretched animal membrane. But it is enough. The air is thick with the mingled scents of peat smoke, for that was our fuel, abundant and earthy, simmering stew and the faint, almost sweet, earthy smell of the livestock often kept at one end of the longhouse for warmth in the deepest part of winter. It was a communal life, you see. No private chambers, no quiet corners for secrets. Every cough, every sigh, every quiet conversation, every shared dream and unspoken worry was part of the shared fabric of our existence, and the constant, gentle rustle of straw from the sleeping platforms that lined the walls, a peculiar, comforting lullaby that sang us to rest each night. As he speaks, you might imagine the subtle shift from standing outdoors to being enveloped by the interior of a vast, shared dwelling. You can almost feel the packed earth floor beneath your bare feet, the warmth radiating from the central hearth, and the soft presence of unseen others around you. Our meals were simple, hearty affairs. Leif continues, a note of practical appreciation in his voice. Stews made from root vegetables, turnips, carrots from the garden patch, and dried meat, often smoked fish or cured reindeer, fresh-baked flatbread, thin and warm from the griddle, perhaps a slab of cheese made from the milk of our own cows, the soft clatter of wooden bowls, spoons scraping against earthenware, the low murmur of conversation, sometimes interspersed with the boisterous laughter of children, punctuated by the occasional contented bark of a dog curled by the hearth. You might even hear the quiet thump-thump of a child practicing with a wooden sword in the corner, dreaming of future glory, of sagas yet unwritten. Even at table, the future was always present, always just beyond the edges of the firelight. You can almost taste the simple, sustaining food and hear the gentle hubbub of family life around you. The scene is one of quiet, unassuming warmth. The women, bless them, were the bedrock of our homes, the very foundation upon which our society stood, Leif says, his voice tinged with deep respect. You would hear the rhythmic thud of a woman kneading dough for the day's bread, the soft snip of shears as wool was prepared for spinning, the comforting whisper of a mother singing a lullaby to her child, a melody as old as the mountains themselves. Their hands were never idle, for idleness was a luxury we could ill afford. They managed the household with tireless efficiency, preserved food for the long winters, wove cloth that kept us warm against the biting winds, and raised our children to be strong, resilient, and resourceful. Without their tireless work, there would be no men to sail the treacherous seas, no warriors to defend our lands, no families to return to after a long voyage. They were the silent strength, the enduring heart of our people. He gestures towards a corner of the longhouse where you can almost visualize a woman at a spinning wheel, its gentle whirring a constant backdrop to the sounds of the home. The scene is one of quiet industry, of enduring strength. And the men? We spent our days mending tools, carving wood for new implements or intricate decorations, building boats that would carry us across the waves, or tending to the fields when the short growing season allowed. You would hear the sharp whistle of an axe chopping wood, its sound echoing cleanly in the crisp air, the rhythmic scrape of a knife shaping timber, slowly coaxing form from raw material, the satisfying thump as planks were fitted into place on a growing longship. These were the sounds of our survival, the constant symphony of our industry, a testament to our ingenuity and perseverance. Even our sagas, our grand tales of gods and heroes, were often recounted during these quiet, industrious hours, weaving history into the very fabric of daily life, binding us to our ancestors and to the future. You might find yourself imagining the feel of raw wood, the scent of fresh-cut timber, and the satisfying ache of manual labor, contributing to a tangible creation. Evenings were for the telling of tales, for mending nets by the firelight, for planning the next harvest or the next journey across the sea. Leif continues, his voice becoming softer, more reflective. The flickering glow of the central hearth would cast long dancing shadows on the timber walls, making the familiar seem mystical, as voices, low and resonant, spoke of gods like Odin and Thor, of heroes like Ragnar and Sigurd, and of distant lands glimpsed only in dreams or whispered rumors. You might hear the faint twang of a lyre, its notes soft and mournful, or the rhythmic thrum of a drum adding to the quiet, hypnotic atmosphere, lulling us into contemplation. It was in these hours when the day's toil was done, when the practical demands of survival receded, that our dreams took flight, carried on the wings of ancient stories. You feel the comforting presence of the fire's warmth, hear the low hum of conversation, and perhaps sense the shared intimacy of lives closely intertwined. Our children, even the smallest ones, learned quickly the ways of our world. Leif says, a touch of fond remembrance in his voice. They were not coddled, but integrated into the rhythm of our lives, the constant buzz of activity, the shared tasks, the lessons taught not from scrolls, for we had few, but from observation and participation. They learned to tie knots that would hold a ship fast against a storm, to track animals through the snow, to listen to the whispers of the wind and the warnings of the waves. Their laughter, bright and clear, was a precious sound, cutting through the practical realities of our lives, a reminder of the joy that sustained us through hardship. You might smile, imagining the innocent joy of children playing in such a rugged world, their voices a bright counterpoint to the more somber tones. Hygiene, you ask? Ah, that was a more flexible concept than in your time, Leif admits, a rare, dry chuckle escaping him. Baths were taken certainly, often in communal bathhouses warmed by heated stones, the air thick with steam and the good-natured laughter of men and women. But soap was a luxury, a precious commodity, and the constant exposure to peat smoke, animal hides, and the rigors of outdoor life meant one always carried a certain earthy aroma. We were, after all, people of the land and sea, not delicate flowers accustomed to perfumed silks. You might find it rather bracing, or perhaps a touch overwhelming, but it was our scent, the smell of honest toil and fresh air, a testament to a life lived fully and without pretense. The scene around you subtly shifts, expanding to include the wider village. You hear the distant splash of water from a stream, the lowing of livestock from a nearby pasture, and the murmur of quiet activity from other longhouses. And sleep in the longhouse was a shared experience, Leif concludes, his voice dropping to a low, comforting murmur. The low snore of your neighbor on the sleeping platform beside you, the soft rustle of animals at the far end of the hall, the comforting presence of other bodies radiating warmth against the biting cold of a northern night. There was little privacy, yes, but there was also much companionship, a deep, unspoken bond forged in shared space and shared vulnerability. It was a sleep born of utter exhaustion from honest labor, and a deep, primal trust in your kin, in the protective embrace of your community. The long, dark nights, often lit only by the flickering fire in the central hearth, invited dreams that were as vivid and untamed as the rugged landscapes we inhabited. This was our quiet world, carved out of rock and ice, sustained by resilience, by ingenuity, and by the enduring warmth of shared lives. It was a life of stark beauty, of constant challenges, and of a quiet strength that hummed beneath the surface, preparing us for whatever the sea or the gods might send our way. Leif pauses, his gaze sweeping over the fading image of the longhouse, as if taking one last look at the foundation of his being. The sounds of the village begin to recede, fading into a gentle, rhythmic lapping sound, the unmistakable rhythm of water against wood. Now that you have seen the man, let us return to the voyage that echoes loudest through time. Leif Erikson's voice resonates, a deeper timbre now, like the hum of a ship's timbers under strain. For it was the sea that truly called to us, pulling us westward to lands unknown. But before I tell you of that journey, you must understand the currents that steered my own life. Less visible, perhaps, but no less powerful than any storm. You feel a subtle shift in the air, a sense of moving from the communal warmth of the longhouse to a more personal, reflective space. The sounds of the village fade, replaced by a quiet, almost intimate silence, save for Leif's voice. My path, you see, was shaped early by restless blood. He begins, a hint of ancient weariness in his tone. My father, Eric the Red, was a man who knew exile intimately. He led us from Norway, then from Iceland, before carving out our home in Greenland. It was a harsh land, cold and unforgiving, but it was ours. I grew up in his shadow, learning from his fierce spirit and his unyielding will. His life was a saga in itself, a testament to what one man could achieve when driven from every familiar shore. He taught me about the land, about survival in the most desolate of places, and about the importance of carving out your own destiny, even if it meant defying what others considered normal. Leif pauses, a faint, almost wistful smile touching his lips. But a man does not simply inherit his destiny. I myself was sent at the tender age of 8 to be raised by a wise German, a man named Turker, who had once been held by my father. He was not kin by blood, but by spirit. This was a custom, you see, a way to broaden a young man's horizons, to learn from someone outside the immediate family. Turker taught me far more than just how to wield a sword or pilot a longship, though he taught me those well enough. He taught me the quiet arts of survival, of how to read the forest, of strange tongues and stranger customs. A curious upbringing, perhaps, to be raised by one not of our blood, but it taught me to see the world with different eyes, to listen for the whispers beyond the obvious. He showed me that knowledge could be found in unexpected places, and that strength came not just from muscle, but from understanding. You might imagine the young Leif, a Viking boy, learning from a man of different origins, the quiet lessons exchanged under the vast northern sky. The scene is one of subtle cultural exchange, of a mind being quietly opened. It was not just the lure of unknown lands that pulled me. Leif continues, his voice now taking on a more deliberate, almost formal tone. Before the great voyage that would bring me renown, a different kind of journey called me. I traveled to Norway, to the court of King Olaf Tryggvason. He was a powerful king, a man of strong convictions, and a fervent believer in the Christ faith. It was a faith very different from the gods of my fathers, from Odin and Thor, from the old ways of Asgard and Valhalla. But there, in his court, surrounded by the whispers of a new truth, I found myself drawn to it. I listened, I learned, and in time, I found myself embracing this new belief. It was a quiet conversion, certainly, not with the clang of battle, but with the steady turning of the heart. He pauses, and you sense the profound personal shift he describes, the weight of a decision that would ripple through his family and community. King Olaf, upon seeing my conviction, then charged me with a sacred mission, Leif explains, his voice tinged with the solemnity of that ancient task. To bring this new faith back to Greenland, to my own people. It was a quieter conquest, perhaps, than any raid, but no less profound, no less challenging. I was to be a messenger, a bridge between the old world and the new, carrying not weapons, but words of peace and a promise of salvation. Imagine the weight of that task, to return to your homeland, to your kinsmen, with a message that challenges the very foundations of their beliefs, the gods they had worshipped for generations. I returned, bringing not just the news of new lands, but of a new God, Leif continues, a faint, almost melancholic smile touching his lips. My mother, Theodhild, a woman of deep piety in her own way, was among the first to embrace it. She listened to my words, felt the truth in them, and embraced the Christ faith wholeheartedly. So fervent was her new belief that she built the first Christian church in Greenland, a quiet stone structure rising against the harsh landscape, a testament to her devotion. You might picture her, a strong Norse woman overseeing the careful placement of each stone, her faith as unyielding as the rock itself. A subtle tension seems to enter the air, a hint of unresolved conflict. My father, Eric, however, Leif's voice softens, tinged with a quiet sadness. He was a stubborn man. He held fast to the old ways, to the gods of his ancestors, to the thunder of Thor and the wisdom of Odin. He respected my choice, perhaps, but he did not share it. This created a rift, a quiet tension within our family, a silent chasm that even the warmth of the longhouse fire could not bridge. There are sagas that whisper of my mother, Theodhild, even refusing to sleep in the same bed as Eric because of his refusal to abandon the old gods. A domestic conflict, yes, but one that echoed the great spiritual battle sweeping across our world. It teaches you that even the strongest bonds can be tested by belief. Leif shifts his stance, his gaze seeming to stretch into the distance, beyond the immediate confines of your shared space. It was after my father, Eric the Red, passed from this world that I fully stepped into my destiny as a leader in Greenland. Leif recounts, his voice gaining a quiet authority. I took over his position as chieftain, guiding our settlements, overseeing the harvests, ensuring our people survived the harsh winters. It was a life of responsibility, of making hard decisions for the good of all. I continued to consolidate our community, to build and sustain our homes, and to slowly, quietly continue the work of spreading the Christ faith, not with force, but with gentle persuasion and the example of a peaceful life. It was a different kind of leadership than the daring voyages, but no less important. It was the grounding, the anchoring after the winds of discovery. He pauses, and a faint, almost imperceptible warmth seems to emanate from him, a sense of quiet accomplishment. And it was during one of my return journeys, not the one from Vinland, but from Norway after my conversion, that I truly earned the name Leif the Lucky. Leif explains, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. It was a stormy sea, a treacherous journey. We sighted a shipwreck, a vessel battered by the waves, its crew clinging to the splintered remains. Without hesitation, we steered my ship towards them, battling the churning waters to reach them. We pulled them from the icy embrace of the sea, wet and shivering, but alive. I brought them back to Greenland, cared for their wounds, and helped them find a new life, a new home within our community. It was an act of pure compassion, you see, a simple kindness on the vast, indifferent ocean. And for that, for being in the right place at the right time and choosing to act, I was called the Lucky. Perhaps it was luck, or perhaps simply the grace of the new God I had come to believe in, guiding my hand. It teaches you that sometimes the greatest fame comes not from conquest, but from simply helping another soul in need. You might feel a quiet sense of admiration for the man beside you, a deeper understanding of the values that shaped him beyond mere historical facts. So, you see, my life was a tapestry woven with these diverse threads. The wild spirit of my father, who pushed the boundaries of the known world, Leif reflects, his voice becoming softer, more contemplative. The quiet wisdom of my foster father, Tyrker, who taught me to see beyond the obvious. The call of a new faith, which brought a different kind of purpose to my heart. And the endless pull of the unknown, the urge to set sail into the vastness, not just for glory, but for understanding. These were the lessons I carried, deeper than any cargo, heavier than any sword. They were the silent compass that guided my voyages, both across the ocean and within my own soul. He gestures around the space, which now feels less like a specific location and more like a boundless void, filled only with the echoes of his story. A man is not merely the sum of his deeds, but of the currents that shape him, the whispers that guide him, and the choices he makes when the wind is biting and the stars are hidden. It is a life, perhaps, that few truly know, overshadowed by the very fame it brought. But it is a life that taught me about perseverance, about belief, and about the surprising connections that bind us all, even across the vastness of time and sea. Now that you have seen the man, my journey, my beliefs, and the very ground that shaped me, let us turn to the voyage that echoes loudest through time. Leif Erikson's voice deepens, taking on the resonant timbre of a ship's timbers straining against a powerful wind. For it was the sea that truly called to us, that relentless, whispering expanse that pulled us westward to lands unknown. It was a call felt not just in the heart, but in the very bones, a yearning to see what lay beyond the familiar horizon, beyond the last known settlement in Greenland, beyond the very edge of the maps drawn by human hands. You feel a profound shift in the air around you. The earthy scents of the longhouse fade entirely, replaced by the sharp, invigorating tang of sea salt and the faint, almost nostalgic aroma of pine tar and cured wood. The ground beneath your feet gives way to a gentle, rhythmic sway, the unmistakable rise and fall of a longship on the open ocean. You hear the ceaseless, hypnotic lap, lap, lap of waves against a sturdy hull, a sound that quickly becomes the steady heartbeat of your journey. Above you, an unseen wind whispers through unseen rigging, a constant low hum that speaks of vast open spaces and endless possibilities. It was in the year of our Lord, around 1000, that I embarked on this most famous of voyages, Leif recounts, his voice steady, carrying the calm authority of a seasoned navigator. Not with a great war fleet, no. Those were for raids and battles, for making noise. This journey was quieter, more purposeful. We sailed with a single longship, sturdy and true, built for burden rather than battle, a vessel that could carry supplies, and more importantly, the weight of our hopes and the endless curiosity that gnawed at the souls of my crew. We called her the Knar, though in truth her strength lay not in her name, but in the skill of her builders and the courage of her crew. She was our world, a small wooden island against the vast, indifferent ocean. You might imagine the feel of the cool spray on your face, the vast, unbroken circle of the horizon stretching around you, the endless sky, both daunting and inspiring, above. Imagine yourself on that deck with me, Leif invites, his voice close, guiding your thoughts. The rhythmic creak of the hull groaning softly with every swell and dip like a living thing. The insistent slap of waves against the bow, a constant reminder of the ocean's power. The unceasing howl of the wind in the rigging, a wild, untamed song that filled our ears day and night. The air was cold, damp with sea spray that kissed our faces and clung to our beards, and thick with the scent of pine tar, sealing the wood against the relentless water, and the faint, lingering aroma of dried fish, our sustenance for weeks at sea. There was little comfort, certainly, in the endless roll of the waves and the constant cold, only the stark, undeniable reality of the open ocean stretching endlessly before us, a canvas of gray and blue. You find yourself bracing slightly, feeling the gentle heave of the deck, your body instinctively adjusting to the rhythm of the ship. The sounds of the sea envelop you, a deep, encompassing drone that encourages your mind to wander and drift. Every man knew the risks. Leif's voice gains a quiet solemnity. Every man accepted them. To put out into the vastness was to gamble with the gods, to challenge the very limits of human endurance. Storms could rise without warning. Icebergs could loom from the mists, and the hunger of the sea was always present, waiting to claim those who faltered. But this was the price of discovery, the unspoken pact we made with the waves. And with a crew of perhaps 35 souls, each one a testament to courage and resilience, we put our faith in the ship, in our skills, and in the whispers of the unseen winds. We sailed west from Greenland, following not a map drawn on parchment, but the spoken accounts of another voyager, a merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson, Leif recounts, his voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller by firelight. He had glimpsed new lands years before, driven off course by a great storm, but in his practicality as a trader, he had not dared to set foot upon them. His tale, recounted in hushed tones around the longhouse fire on a dark night, was a puzzle, a series of tantalizing clues that gnawed at my explorer's spirit. He spoke of a land of flat stones and cold glaciers, then another of white sand and vast forests, and finally, a land teeming with wild grapevines. Such talk was enough to stir the blood of any Norseman with a drop of wanderlust, a seed planted in my mind that would not rest until I had seen these lands with my own eyes. The vastness of the ocean, the endless, unchanging horizon, seems to stretch before you. Days blend into a monotonous rhythm, punctuated only by the subtle shifts in weather and the internal clock of the ship's routine. The days blurred into a monotonous rhythm, Leif's voice describes, mirroring the steady, relentless pace of the voyage. The endless gray of the sky, often heavy with low-hanging clouds, mirrored by the endless gray of the sea beneath us. The only colors were the occasional flash of a distant iceberg, or the dark, sleek form of a whale breaching the surface. The constant, gentle thump of our chests against the oars, hour after hour, pulling us ever westward, our muscles aching with the constant exertion. The low murmur of the men, sometimes singing a sea shanty to keep spirits high, their voices thin against the vastness, sometimes simply lost in their own thoughts, staring out at the unchanging horizon. The food was simple: dried meat, tough as old leather, hardtack that tested our teeth, and fermented milk, sour but sustaining. Water, carefully rationed, tasted of wood and the deep, silent desperation of long stretches at sea. He pauses, and you almost feel the physical discomfort of the journey, the ache in your own muscles, the endless, repetitive motion. But then, one morning, After days that stretched into weeks of nothing but ocean, a change, a subtle shift in the air, a scent carried on the wind that was not salt, not ice, not tar. And then a sound. A faint, distant sound. Something other than the sea's relentless whisper. A whisper of land. And then a smell. Not the cold, sharp scent of ice from Greenland, but something warmer, softer, profoundly earthy. Forests. A smell that brought a quiet excitement to the crew. A subtle shift in the air that promised solid ground, warmth, life. It was a smell that filled our lungs and our hopes. A promise whispered by the gods themselves after the endless desolation of the ocean. You can almost feel the collective breath of the crew, the silent anticipation that would have gripped them, the subtle shift from despair to quiet hope. The first land we sighted, we named Helluland. Flat stone land, Leif recounts, his voice tinged with a detached observation. It was bleak and barren, just as Bjarni had described, with flat, gray rocks stretching inland and cold, towering glaciers glinting in the distance. It was not what we sought, not the fertile land of our dreams. We landed briefly, felt the unfamiliar solid ground beneath our feet. After weeks of the ship's constant motion, heard the quiet shriek of gulls overhead, but it offered little promise. And then, we pushed on. The wind, ever our companion, ever our guide, seemed to urge us onward, whispering of something more hospitable, of the greener lands that lay beyond. He pauses, and you sense the quiet determination that would have pushed them forward, even after finding a desolate shore. Next, after more days of sailing south following the coastline, we found Markland, forest land. Leif continues, a note of wonder in his voice, as if still marveling at the vastness of it. A vast, dark forest stretched as far as the eye could see, timber enough for 1,000 ships, for 1,000 longhouses. The air here was rich with the scent of pine and damp earth, a profound contrast to the barren ice of Greenland, or the desolate rocks of Helluland. We landed, and the stillness of the forest enveloped us, broken only by the quiet chatter of unfamiliar birds and the rustle of leaves underfoot. We cut some timber, felt the satisfying bite of the axe against ancient wood, smelled the sharp, resinous tang of freshly felled trees. But still, it was not the land of plenty, the land of grapevines that Bjarni had described. It was a good land, certainly, but not the land. You might imagine the profound silence of that ancient forest, the feeling of being utterly dwarfed by its vastness, a humbling experience for even the boldest of Vikings. And then after more days of sailing, following the coastline ever southward, ever westward, we found it. Leif's voice drops, a quiet triumph in his tone. A place where the land was gently sloping, fertile, kissed by a milder sun. The rivers teemed with salmon, larger and more plentiful than any we had seen in our northern waters. You could almost hear the quiet splash of their leaping bodies. There were fields of wild wheat, growing tall and golden, rustling softly in the breeze. And most remarkable of all, grapevines. Wild grapevines heavy with fruit, climbing the trees, carpeting the ground. We tasted the wild grapes, sweet and tart, a flavor unknown to us in the cold north, a burst of unexpected sweetness that spoke of bounty and warmth. We named it Vinland, Wineland, for the sheer unexpected bounty it offered. It was a land of warmth, of abundance, a land that truly felt like a gift from the gods themselves after the harshness of Greenland and the endless struggle of the sea. You almost taste the sweetness of the wild grapes, feel the gentle warmth of the Vinland sun on your face, a profound sense of peace settling over you. We wintered there, in Vinland, Leif recounts, a note of quiet contentment in his voice. We built simple shelters, felt the surprising mildness of the air, so much softer than our northern homes. The quiet sounds of a new, unfamiliar forest enveloped us. The calls of birds we had never heard before, the gentle rustle of leaves underfoot, the distant murmur of the sea, now a comforting backdrop rather than a relentless challenge. It was a land where the grass did not wither, and the salmon leaped freely. The men, their faces weathered by the arduous journey, slept more soundly than they had in weeks, lulled by the promise of this fertile shore, their dreams filled with the bounty of this newfound land. He pauses, and you feel the tranquil peace of that first winter in Vinland, a sense of well-earned rest and quiet hope. But even in this land of plenty, peace was not a given. Leif's voice gains a subtle edge, a return to the practical realities of their world. We encountered the Skrælings, as we called them, the native peoples of this land. Our initial meetings were cautious, marked by the exchange of goods, furs for cloth, a quiet bartering that held both curiosity and suspicion. But understanding, alas, was a more difficult commodity to trade. Suspicion, alas, was never far from the surface, a subtle unease that permeated the air, a sense of being observed from the shadows. The quiet contentment of Vinland fades, replaced by a subtle tension in the atmosphere. You hear the faint, almost imperceptible sound of rustling leaves, as if something unseen is watching. There were skirmishes, sharp and sudden, marked by the sharp thwack of arrows hitting wood and the clash of unfamiliar weapons against our own. Leif recounts, his voice flat, observational, devoid of dramatic flourish, yet conveying the stark reality of violence. It reminded us that even in a land of bounty, a land that felt like a paradise, peace was not a given, and our numbers were too few for conquest. We were explorers, not an invading army. We learned rather quickly that this land, despite its overwhelming generosity, was not ours to take without a fight, and the price of that fight, for our small band, was too high to pay. He pauses, a faint, almost imperceptible sadness in his voice, a quiet resignation. After that first winter, and a few more cautious expeditions along the coastline, we knew our time there was limited. We returned to Greenland, bringing with us valuable timber, precious furs, and the quiet, wondrous tale of Vinland. It was not a tale of a conquered land, of a new dominion, but of a glimpsed possibility, a whisper of a world beyond the known, a testament to the sheer vastness of creation. The long journey back was filled with reflections, with the silent contemplation of what we had seen and what we had left behind. The rhythmic lap-lap of the waves against the hull, now a familiar comfort, carried us home, carrying the knowledge of a green land across the gray, endless sea, a secret held in our hearts. Leif's voice begins to fade, the sounds of the ocean receding into a soft, distant murmur. You are left with the quiet echoes of discovery, of wonder, and of the subtle complexities of human encounter. The space around you is still and peaceful, encouraging deep reflection. We have spoken of voyages and discoveries, of the vastness of the sea and the quiet beauty of new lands. Leif Erikson's voice begins, a steady, measured tone, as if leading you into a calmer, more introspective space. But a people are not merely defined by their journeys. They are forged in the rhythms of their daily lives, in the structures they build around themselves, in the subtle dance of power and community. Come, let us walk through the intricate tapestry of our Norse society, where every thread, from the humblest thrall to the mightiest jarl, played its part. You feel the constant, gentle sway of the longship fade entirely. The air around you becomes still, thick with the scent of wood smoke and a faint, comforting earthiness. The sounds of the ocean recede, replaced by the distant rhythmic clang of a smithy's hammer, the lowing of cattle, and the murmur of human voices, weaving a living soundscape of a Norse settlement. You are on solid ground again, the feel of packed earth firm beneath your feet. Life in the Norse lands, as in any society, was a delicate balance between the grand and the humble. Leif explains, his gaze sweeping over an unseen landscape. While our sagas often speak of kings and jarls, chieftains, powerful men who commanded respect and loyalty, the very beating heart of our society lay not in distant palaces, but in the communal longhouse, where status was often earned, not merely inherited. It was a fluid world, shaped by deeds and reputation as much as by bloodline. A man could rise or fall depending on his strength, his wisdom, and his luck. He gestures towards an unseen, expansive longhouse, larger than the one you imagined in the first segment. Consider the jarl, the chieftain. He lived in a larger longhouse, certainly, often with finer carvings adorning the timber walls and more elaborate tapestries woven by skilled hands. His hearth would be grander, his sleeping platform more spacious, perhaps adorned with furs brought from distant hunts. But make no mistake, he still shared his space. With his family, his close retainers, his loyal warriors, and often, in the depths of winter, even his livestock would share the warmth at one end of the great hall. The sounds of his daily life, the crackle of the hearth, the clatter of bowls, the murmur of voices, were not so different from those of the free farmer, though perhaps the conversations whispered around his fire held a heavier weight of politics and strategy. You might imagine the subtle difference in atmosphere, the added sense of responsibility hanging in the air of such a place. His burden, however, was far heavier, Leif continues, his voice gaining a solemn note. The Jarl bore the constant responsibility for his people, for their safety from raiding parties, for their prosperity in the face of harsh seasons, for resolving disputes that could tear a community apart. Imagine the quiet hum of worries that must have filled his mind, even as he feigned nonchalance during a feast. The constant threat of famine, the need for defense, the intricate web of alliances and feuds. These were the unseen weights that pressed upon a chieftain's shoulders, even in his sleep. He turns his attention to a quieter yet profoundly influential aspect of Norse society. Our women, whether of humble birth or noble lineage, held surprising power within the home, a realm that was perhaps even more vital than the battlefield, Leif explains, his voice tinged with deep respect. They were the managers of the household, wielding authority that reached into every corner of domestic life. They controlled the keys to the storage chests, symbols of their command over the household's wealth and sustenance. They often oversaw vast estates while the men were away on voyages, trading expeditions, or raids that lasted for months, even years. You would hear the decisive thud of their hands as they guided the household, their voices, though perhaps not heard in the great assembly, the thing holding undeniable authority within their domain. They were the anchors, holding the community steady against the shifting tides of external life, ensuring that when the men returned, there was a home, a hearth, and food awaiting them. You might picture a strong, capable Norse woman moving through her day with quiet competence, her presence a steady force in the heart of the home. Contrasted with the warmth of the communal longhouse, where every life was intertwined, there was also the profound chill of isolation, Leif says, his voice dropping to a serious, almost somber tone. For those who broke the law, who committed offenses against kin or community, or who simply fell out of favor with the powerful, exile was a common and terrifying punishment. Imagine the profound silence of being cast out, forced to wander alone in the vast, unforgiving wilderness, with only the whisper of the wind for company and the gnawing ache of loneliness in your soul. No communal warmth, no shared hearth, no familiar voices in the night. It was a punishment that spoke not of pain of the body, but of profound loneliness, severing the very bonds that held our society together. To be alone in the wilds, beyond the reach of kinship and community, was a fate often considered worse than death itself. The air around you feels momentarily colder, carrying a sense of vast, empty spaces. Our assemblies, the things, were places of boisterous debate and fierce argument, certainly, but also of quiet consensus, if it could be reached. Leif continues, his voice returning to a more engaging pitch. Here, all free men had a voice, from the humblest farmer whose hands were gnarled from working the land to the proudest jarl whose ancestors had ruled for generations. You would hear the low murmur of discussion, the sudden roar of agreement when a popular point was made, the solemn thud of a staff marking a decision or a judgment being rendered. It was a harsh democracy, certainly, where arguments could escalate quickly and justice was often swift and unforgiving, but one where even the lowliest could be heard if they spoke with conviction and courage. Power was fluid, earned through reputation and deeds, through the strength of one's arguments and the loyalty of one's followers, not just by birthright. The subtle shift in the crowd's mood, a silent barometer of popular will, was often more telling than any shouted declaration. You can almost feel the energy of the assembly, the tension of debate, the weight of collective decision-making. The practice of blood feud, though often leading to violence and a seemingly endless cycle of retribution, was also governed by intricate, unspoken rules, a complex code of honor, Leif explains, his tone becoming more analytical. It was a long, slow dance of retribution and negotiation, where honor was paramount, and every slight, every injury demanded a response. Imagine the quiet tension in a room as two families, bound by a history of grievances, sat to negotiate peace, their faces betraying little emotion, yet every subtle gesture laden with meaning, with threat and unspoken history. The subtle clink of weapons, always at hand, a constant reminder of the stakes involved. It was a system designed to prevent greater chaos, to channel vengeance into a structured, if often bloody, process. An uncomfortable truth of our society, certainly, but one rooted in a deep understanding of human nature. He pauses, and you might hear the faint, sharp ring of metal quickly fading. Even our famed warriors, those who sailed the longships and wielded the battle axes, lived lives of profound contrast, Leif muses, his voice tinged with reflection. On the voyage, whether for trade or raid, it was shared hardship, shared purpose, a brotherhood forged in the face of constant danger, of vast, indifferent oceans and unknown shores. But upon return to the quiet farming life, the transition was not always easy. The echoes of battle, the thrill of the raid, the taste of victory, or the bitterness of defeat might linger in the soul, creating a quiet restlessness that could not always be quelled by the peaceful rhythms of the farm. The subtle hum of distant memories, even in the peaceful fields, could stir the heart to yearn for the open sea once more. You might imagine a Viking warrior, axe now exchanged for a plow, his gaze still holding the distant glint of the horizon. And then there were the enslaved, the thralls who existed at the lowest rung of our society. Leif's voice drops, a quiet solemnity replacing the previous tones. Their lives were filled with ceaseless toil, with little respite. They built our longhouses, worked our fields, served in our homes. The rhythmic scrape of their tools, the low grunt of their labor was a constant, almost invisible background to the lives of the free. Yet even they, in their quiet desperation, found small moments of hope, of quiet defiance, of whispered dreams for freedom. The stark reality of their existence was a quiet shadow cast upon the otherwise vibrant tapestry of Norse life. A reminder that even in a society built on freedom for some, profound unfreedom existed for others. The air feels momentarily heavy, reflecting the unspoken weight of this reality. Our feasts, of course, were legendary, Leif's voice lightens, recalling the warmth and camaraderie. The roar of laughter, the clatter of drinking horns, the boisterous singing of sagas and drinking songs. But amidst the revelry, there was always an undercurrent of observation. Who sat where? Who was honored with the finest portion of meat? Who received the largest draught from the mead horn? Every gesture, every word, every subtle glance held meaning. It was a subtle dance of power, played out amidst the sounds of celebration, a constant assessment of alliances and rivalries. The quiet sip of ale, a moment of contemplation before a hearty cheer, a silent calculation beneath the surface of apparent merriment. You might hear the clatter of horns, the joyous shouts, and yet feel the subtle tension of unspoken rules and hidden meanings. Finally, consider the long, dark winter nights, Leif concludes, his voice dropping to a low, comforting murmur, painting a picture of profound stillness. For months, the land lay shrouded in snow and ice, the sea a frozen expanse, silent and unyielding. Life retreated indoors, to the warmth of the longhouse, drawing us closer together. It was a time for mending tools, for storytelling, for quiet reflection, for repairing nets that would feed us in the spring. The rhythmic whisper of the wind against the walls, carrying the faint scent of snow, the crackle of the fire, its flames dancing, the shared warmth of communal bodies pressed close against the biting cold. In those long nights, our dreams grew vivid, our hopes for the spring grew strong, nurtured by the quiet rhythm of shared survival. And the quiet creak of the timbers, holding steadfast against the biting cold, was a comforting reminder of endurance, of the steadfastness that lay at the heart of our people, waiting patiently for the sun to return and for the call of the open sea once more. Leif pauses, his gaze sweeping over the unseen landscape, a deep sense of peaceful reflection in his voice. The sounds of the settlement, which had been so vivid, now begin to fade, dissolving into a soft, consistent hum, the kind that encourages the mind to drift. Our sagas, our stories, tell of these journeys and of the lives we led. Leif Erikson's voice begins, a deeper timbre now, tinged with a quiet sense of ancient wonder. But the earth itself holds its own tales, often whispered through the quiet work of archaeologists and the silent revelations of a grave. Come, let us walk through the echoes that remain, the silent testaments to our beliefs, our craftsmanship, and our connection to the world unseen. You feel the subtle shift in the air, a cool, dry sensation, as if entering an ancient, undisturbed space. The rhythmic sounds of the longship and the vibrant life of the settlement fade, replaced by a profound stillness, punctuated only by Leif's resonant voice. You sense the faint, earthy scent of ancient soil, mixed with something metallic, like old iron, and a subtle sweetness, perhaps of decaying wood or long-dried herbs. Consider the longships themselves, not merely vessels, but works of art, carved from ancient timbers, held together by iron rivets and the strength of our ancestors' hands, Leif explains, his voice filled with reverence. Imagine the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of the carpenter's hammers, shaping the keel, bending the mighty planks with fire and water, each precise strike a note in a symphony of creation. To this day, when one unearths a buried longship, like those found at Oseberg or Gokstad, it is as if the vessel still breathes the sea air, its timbers whispering of distant voyages. The wood, preserved by the earth's cool embrace for centuries, tells of incredible craftsmanship, of audacious courage, and of a deep, almost spiritual connection to the sea that was both provider and formidable opponent. You can almost smell the ancient pine tar, mingled with the faint scent of damp earth, clinging to these spectral ships, remnants of a bygone era. You might imagine the sheer scale and beauty of these ships, now silent giants, their forms barely discernible beneath layers of soil, yet speaking volumes of the hands that built them and the waters they conquered. Our burial mounds were not merely graves, cold holes in the ground where bodies returned to dust. They were thresholds, passages to the afterlife, places where the living communed with the dead and committed their loved ones to the care of the gods, Leif continues, his voice solemn. Imagine the profound silence, the hushed reverence as we laid our dead to rest, often in their very longships, those vessels that had carried them through life, now ready to carry them into the next world. They were surrounded by the tools of their lives, their weapons gleaming in the last light, their cherished jewelry, sometimes even their horses or dogs, sacrificed to accompany them on their final journey. What quiet rituals were performed, do you think? What prayers whispered into the cold earth? What hopes for a glorious afterlife committed to the cold embrace of the earth as the soft thud of soil covered the ship, slowly transforming it into a silent mound, a testament to belief, a monument raised by grief and tradition? You feel the weight of this ancient ritual, the quiet dignity of farewells performed beneath a vast, indifferent sky, the deep sense of continuity between life and death, the intricate patterns of Viking art etched into wood, hammered into metal, and carved into stone, often speak of a fierce, untamed beauty, a swirling, animalistic energy that seems to writhe with life, Leif observes, his voice now taking on an appreciative tone, as if admiring a masterpiece. But look closer. Let your fingers trace the smooth surface of a carved runestone, and you will find a quiet contemplation, a deep connection to the natural world. The swirling beasts, the intertwined serpents, the complex knots, they represent the interconnectedness of life and death, of chaos and order, of the visible and the invisible realms. It is a language etched in silence, a story told without words, waiting to be understood not with spoken sounds, but with a quiet gaze and an open heart. The deliberate scrape of a carving tool, shaping the intricate lines, the careful methodical work, was a meditation in itself, a way of imbuing the material with spirit. You can almost feel the cool, rough texture of the stone against your fingertips, connecting you to the hand that carved it 1,000 years ago, to the thoughts that guided its creation. You might envision the detailed artistry, the subtle interplay of light and shadow on these ancient artifacts, sensing the patient dedication of the craftsman. And our sagas, my friend, not merely tales of raid and conquest, though those exist in abundance, certainly, but also quieter stories. Stories of family feuds that spanned generations, their complex loyalties and betrayals whispered around the fire. Stories of legal disputes, argued with fierce eloquence at the things, our assemblies. Stories of the quiet courage of women, managing their households and enduring long absences. Stories of the wisdom of old men, whose counsel was sought and treasured. They were told by firelight in the warmth of the longhouse, the voices low and resonant, weaving a tapestry of memory that bound our people together across generations. The rhythmic cadence of the storyteller's voice, rising and falling like the waves on the shore, the hushed attention of the listeners, the occasional soft gasp or murmur of agreement. It was our history, breathed into life, passed from one heart to another, ensuring that no life, no deed, however small, was truly forgotten. You feel the presence of these ancient storytellers, their voices echoing across time, binding you to their narrative. The berserkers, those warriors said to fight in a trance-like fury, almost like wild animals, are often remembered for their terrifying wildness, their seemingly unstoppable rage in battle. Leif continues, his voice dropping slightly, conveying a sense of the enigmatic. But what quiet madness gripped them? Was it a spiritual ecstasy, a connection to the raw, untamed forces of nature, a divine madness sent by Odin himself? Or perhaps a drug-induced fervor, brought on by certain herbs or mushrooms, dulling pain and sharpening aggression? Or simply the desperate primal courage of men pushed to their absolute limits, facing overwhelming odds? The mystery endures, a silent question whispered by the wind over ancient battlefields. Imagine the low, guttural growl of a berserker before battle, the quiet intensity in his eyes, a stillness before the storm of violence erupted around him. It speaks of a different kind of inner world, one both terrifying and compelling, a controlled chaos that few truly understood. You might feel a faint chill, a sense of the unknown and the untamed, in the shadow of this ancient mystery. Our rune stones, scattered across the lands we traveled, from the distant shores of Russia to the fertile plains of England, were not always declarations of conquest, loud boasts of victory. Leif explains, his voice taking on a more intimate tone. Often they were quiet memorials to fallen kinsmen, a simple statement carved into enduring stone to mark a life lived and lost. Or simple statements of ownership, marking a piece of land, a trade route. Imagine the painstaking chip, chip, chip of the carver's hammer, hour after hour, slowly revealing the ancient script from the raw rock. Each mark, each line, a whisper from the past, a silent testament to a life lived and a story remembered, a name etched into eternity. The cool, rough texture of the stone against your fingertips, connecting you to the hand that carved it 1,000 years ago, to the quiet thoughts that guided its creation, hoping to preserve a memory against the relentless march of time. You sense the enduring power of these silent stones, their stoic presence amidst the changing landscape, carrying ancient messages. The Valhalla of our myths, often pictured as a glorious feasting hall, a place of endless battle and endless celebration for fallen warriors, speaks not only of warriors' joy, but of a quiet hope for eternity, a profound longing for peace after a life of struggle. Leif muses, his voice growing reflective. It was a comforting thought, a promise of rest and revelry for those who died bravely in battle, a reward for a life of honor. Imagine the deep sigh of a dying warrior, knowing his journey was not yet ended, but merely beginning anew in Odin's hall, free from the pain of wounds, finally at peace. This quiet belief in a world beyond, a comforting thought in a harsh existence, gave us strength to face the challenges of life and death with courage. It was a place where all who had lived with honor would meet again in a feast that never ended, beneath a sky that was always bright. You feel the comforting presence of this ancient hope, a sense of eternal rest and reunion. Even our domestic objects, those unassuming remnants unearthed from the earth by curious hands, whisper tales of daily life, of the mundane and the cherished, Leif points out, his voice now intimate, almost tender. The delicate bone combs used to smooth hair and fend off unwelcome guests, the simple weaving tools, speaking of countless hours of patient labor, the polished amber beads worn for adornment or perhaps as amulets. Each object held in silence tells of hands that once used them, of lives lived with purpose and dignity, of small joys and quiet routines. The smooth, cool feel of a polished stone bead passed down through generations, holding a quiet warmth from countless touches. These are the unsung stories, the silent testaments to the everyday rhythms of our ancestors, the quiet humanity that lay beneath the fierce exterior of our people. They remind us that even the most formidable warriors returned to hearth and home, to the simple comforts and quiet connections of daily life. Leif pauses, his voice fading into a profound quietude. The air around you is still, thick with the echoes of ancient lives, the silent stories waiting to be heard. The remnants of Viking culture, from grand ships to humble beads, seem to pulse with a quiet energy, revealing a world far richer and more complex than the common tales suggest.